To get our program off and running tonight, I'm going to bring to the stage our interviewer. We're very pleased, the commemoration committee is very pleased to bring a journalist who's had about 40 years of experience in the Rapid City community. Started off at KEVN way back in 1983 covering sports. He's held just about every position at KEVN. He's now in the anchor position at KOTA at the 5:30 and also at the 6 each day. Ladies and gentlemen, we're pleased, no better journalist to bring to the stage tonight to participate in our interview session with Mayor Barnett, Jack Caudill. You'll probably see in the program that Jack is a recipient of the coveted Tom Brokaw Award for Excellence in Electronic Journalism. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you.
Also now bring to the stage Mayor Steve Allender. Mayor's going to have a few remarks. The mayor's been mayor of Rapid City since 2015. Prior to that, he had a 29-year career in the police force here in Rapid City. We're very pleased to have the mayor join us this evening. Mayor Allender.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. It's been good to see everybody's faces here the last couple of days and participating in these events. And I've spoken a couple of times about it over the last couple of days, and so I feel like I'm repeating myself, and probably to many of the same people, but this commemoration is important for Rapid City. Because it's important to remember who we are as a community and how we got here. And the Rapid City flood, its victims and its survivors, and the changes that have been brought about in Rapid City since that time, that's who we are. That's how we got here. So I'm proud to be a part of this planning over the past year, and the structuring of these events, these educational opportunities, because, you know, as I look out in the audience here, there's a couple of you with gray hair, and it's our duty to inform the younger generations about what we have seen and what we've lived through and what we know. And as far as community goes, I think that's very important. A community is at its best when it is pulling together, ignoring differences, ignoring opinions, and working together for the greater good. And that's who we were in the months and years following the 1972 flood. We've been that way at a smaller scale a number of times since, but that's who we are as a community. Brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, and we're all in this together. So, just to summarize what our responsibility is to not let people forget, not let those coming after us forget who we are and what happened here. What happened here on this ground. That's important. So now I'm going to introduce a man that you're going to hear from tonight. Former Mayor Don Barnett grew up in Rapid City, out in the gap between downtown and West Rapid City. He joined the Boy Scouts, and during that time attained the rank of Eagle Scout. Then he went through high school and college. During graduate school, the Vietnam War was raging, and he decided to join the U.S. Army, and he was commissioned as a second lieutenant during the Vietnam conflict. Due to his training as a medical corps officer, he was called to Washington, D.C. during the riots following the assassination of Martin Luther King. After that, he was assigned as a commander of a medical company of 240 men in Vietnam. During his time there, he earned the Bronze Star during ground operations against hostile forces. Mr. Barnett was discharged honorably in 1969 and came back to Rapid City. When he got here, he felt that we were a little bit negative. He felt like we were lacking enthusiasm, and he wanted to see better for us. So over the next couple of years, he firmed up in his mind that he should run for mayor of Rapid City. And he was elected mayor in 1971 at the ripe old age of 28. Any of you remember being 28? Think you should have been mayor at 28? Me either. As mayor, he led the charge to adopt what we now call the Vision Fund. He convinced the citizens of Rapid City to put an additional tax on themselves to build the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center and the arena that we now call the Don Barnett Fieldhouse. A couple months later, the Rapid City flood, where Don's grit would be tested. 6 months after that, civil disobedience in the streets of Rapid City. The American Indian movement came to town. There was great conflict, and Don took the role of lead mediator, where he now had to try to balance the idea of a rebellion and also keeping down the idea of resistance. He had to wade through all of that. Don left office willingly. He wasn't asked to leave. He wasn't voted out of office. He left willingly after 4 years in 1975, and he was the first mayor of Rapid City to leave office willingly since World War II. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my friend and Rapid City's friend, Don Barnett.
Hello.
Fine, sir.
How you doing tonight?
I are fine.
Good, good, good.
There we go.
Thank you for coming up. Great to have you here. One of the things I've been struck by is all of these flood remembrances have rolled by is the vivid memories that people have from that day. Even 50 years later, talking to you, I know your memory is still extremely vivid from that night. Looking back to 1972, you're a 29-year-old young mayor of Rapid City, back from the Vietnam War. What was this community like? We were talking about before the flood. What was the community like at that point?
Well, we'd had a major improvement in city morale. The 10 members of the council had strongly endorsed the adjusted sales tax to make the Civic Center a real possibility. The people voted on it, and 63.8% of the people agreed to raise their taxes so we could finally have the State A and the State B basketball tournaments in Rapid City. We wouldn't have to go back to Huron or Mitchell or Sioux Falls, and the people were absolutely and fundamentally positive in their attitude to tax themselves. I learned in that first year that Don Barnett alone could not buy a box of staples without the support of the council. They taught me how to listen. I learned how to run with the better ideas that came from the city council. And when I did that, they would give my ideas some serious attention. So we learned to govern as a team during the first year. Also during that first year, I met my wife, and she had a family of 2 little girls, and we were married 3 months before the flood. But that was also 2 months before the sales taxes were approved. There was an absolute attitude of positive change in Rapid City. Kay, my secretary and administrative assistant, she said, "Mr. Mayor, Rapid City's like a city on a launch pad. Nobody can stop us now." And then at 4 o'clock on the afternoon of June 9th, it started to rain.
Now, Don, looking back to the June 9th of 1972 heavy rains all around the Black Hills. When did you first get an inkling that this was not just another June thunderstorm here?
About 7 o'clock, a policeman found me and said there was several, about a dozen, very serious messages for me at City Hall at the desk of the police dispatcher. I went down there right away and I looked at those phone numbers and I called people, and there wasn't an indication or a legal thing that the Weather Bureau could do, but I began to assemble information, and I'd say about 8 o'clock as I sat there on the phone, I began to understand the potential magnitude of what would be the Rapid City and the Black Hills national disaster of 1972. As I gained more information and more experience, I went out on the old rickety wooden bridge that leads into Chapel Valley, right below the fish hatchery, and I watched that bridge implode, and it drifted into the center of Canyon Lake and headed for the spillway. I immediately raced to a nearby nightclub, used the phones, called KOTA, and they put out the general warning in my name. The only problem was, by that time, 80% of the city had lost all electrical power. They couldn't watch their TV, they couldn't listen to the radio, and from that night on, it was a night of absolute terror and destruction, and I might add, pure sadness.
At what point did you realize how bad this was going to be? You knew it was going to be bad, but at what point did you know the extent of it?
Well, that's a tough one. I began to assume that if Canyon Lake broke, if the dam was overlapped and then it would fall apart, the spillway would not be effective, and all of that water would race into the tributary into Rapid Creek, and the water would become extremely high. I would say it was at about 10:30 that I recognized that I would break the law. The the National Weather Service specifically did not give me or the local Weather Bureau the right to announce an all-point evacuation from the shores of Rapid Creek, but I did it anyway.
So when you're looking back, you mentioned most of the city had lost power. So how do you notify people at that point? That's more of a challenge. Technology a lot different then. You can't put it out on Twitter and Facebook. How did you get everybody notified at that point?
Well, we probably didn't. I have said in public confessionals here that I don't think government in general provided an adequate warning on the night of June 9th. But by that time, General Corning had called his men to battle at the National Guard camp. They were in Rapid City to continue their summer training. The Highway Patrol sent 2 patrol cars to the dam at Pactola and used their spotlights and search lights to continually tell the Highway Patrol dispatcher that the dam at Pactola would likely not fail. But nevertheless, little by little, the word got out. We brought in all 3 shifts for the fire department and the police department. Many civil servants just came to work and did what they were told, and for the rest of the evening, it was pure chaos. There were more heroes than I have time to list tonight.
Who's turning out to help at this point? As the situation gets worse, the water rises, who's coming out to help and give a hand?
Neighbors and friends. Ignoring safety for themselves, they helped a neighbor, they helped a friend. They tried to tow onto the camper and get it out of the way of the floodwater. Neighbors save neighbors. If this would not have happened, I am very and absolutely certain the death rate on that terrible night would have far exceeded 500. But it was everybody helping everybody. The police department went into the deep water. They did not run away. And I was very lucky to run into 11 airmen at the corner of Evergreen Drive and Canyon Lake Drive, and they told me that their commander had sent them to Rapid City to help. I asked them if they would work with me all night, and they said, absolutely, Mr. Mayor, show us what to do. They stayed with me till 5 o'clock in the morning, and those gentlemen from the airbase saved the lives of several dozen people. We went to a mobile home park in Roosevelt Park, down on the eastern end of Rapid Creek, and we went into that mobile home park as the mobile homes were being tossed and turned and capsizing on the park itself, floating around, banging into each other, and every time there was a bang, there was another bang, because shortly thereafter the propane tanks exploded. So we had fire, high water, panicking people, and one terrible element in the flood that night, ladies and gentlemen, was this. The water was incredibly cold, and many of our fatalities died of hypothermia. You would not have believed the absolute ungodly coldness of the water. And then we fought those issues throughout the night. Those 11 airmen stayed with me, and then by the next morning, I was out by Meadowbrook Golf Course, and I ran into Larry Lytle, who at that time was the councilman from Ward 3, and he was leading a group of people across the 9-hole Meadowbrook Golf Course, and each two persons were carrying a body. And I met Larry, and then a trailer arrived, a U-Haul trailer being towed by a police car, and in the next 10 minutes, they placed 18 bodies in the U-Haul trailer. Ladies and gentlemen, we had a disaster on our hands.
How reassuring was it, as traumatic as that was, to see those scenes and what everybody saw, that these people are sticking with you and working and continuing to go?
Well, there was a division of responsibility. I'd learned a little bit about that in political science and public administration and the Army. First of all, I want to explain to the people here tonight, or anybody that will ever listen, disaster management is a function of county government, not city government. And by 7 o'clock, I had visited the water treatment plant, and we knew that it was out of operation for at least a week. And I had visited Bennett Clarkson Hospital, where they were evacuating the patients as rapidly as they could. And then we began to sense that there had to be some type of organizational structure. I went down to the courthouse and I talked to Mr. Lloyd St. Pierre, and we agreed then, as we had been trained by the Civil Defense Office, that the county would manage the disaster. Not the mayor, not the city council, and the mayor would return to his primary duties in the water department, the sewer department, the finance department, the parks department, the street department, the bridge department. My job was to make sure we returned the city departments to full operation very quickly.
How well did all of those entities work together?
Very closely throughout the entire summer.
A lot of stories of dramatic rescues out there. Are there any particular rescues that you saw that stick in your mind?
Many failures. I stopped on the concrete bridge where West St. Louis intersects with Mountain View, and then Omaha goes eastward. And I stopped there with my 11 airmen, and by that time we had robbed a sporting goods store, and we had about 40 life jackets and about 200 coils of rope, which the owner willingly just threw them in our car. And I stopped there, and the National Guard were out there and trying to pull people out of the creek. They had just saved 5 lives, but there was two men in a rowboat, and they had a rope tied to it, but a lady had fallen in and then had grabbed onto a log and had climbed up into a cottonwood tree. But she was only about 3 feet above the water. And the airmen and the National Guardsmen took a hold of these ropes, and they tried to snake a rowboat underneath her. And the 2 sergeants were running things without me saying a word. And all of a sudden it got close, and he got the rowboat very, very close. And then there was a bolt of lightning and a terrible, bright, shining thunderstorm. And we heard the sploosh. She fell to her death. The National Guardsmen were distraught with sadness and rage, and they almost had a fist fight in the rowboat. And the sergeant said, reel them in, reel them in. They pulled them to shore. My airmen helped. I put my arms around those young men. I said, you did a wonderful job. Don't blame yourself. But they didn't need any hot air from the mayor. They just got busy and looked for the next people. While I was there, they pulled another 8 people out of the creek. Courage, at the risk of their life. We have a very fine city, folks.
How about the next day? When the sun comes up the next day, what do you find? At what point do you see the devastation that you weren't able to see at night?
Jack, it had been on me since about 4:30 in the morning. My answer is sadness, doom, gloom. How did this happen? I had learned about 5:15 that 3 firemen had been on the upper side of Canyon Lake Park. Canyon Lake itself had tried to save some people. They wouldn't get out of the cabins. The cabins were knocked into the water. There were 4 firemen doing everything they could, even to arrest these 4 people. They had already sent several dozen people out of the Canyon Lake Resort and out of the Chapel Valley area and across the bridge toward Blessed Sacrament, and they were doing such a fine job. And then they went back to get the stragglers. The little cabins busted off their foundation, and those cabins went over the dam. 3 firemen were killed, and that factor was explained to me by the fire chief at about 4:45. Then I found out that one of our policemen had died bravely saving other people down by Black Hills Packing Company. So there was not only the physical things to do, make a list and do them and make another list, there was that momentary period of time when sadness just about overwhelmed Rapid City.
How do you keep going at that point?
Prayer, wonderful wife, and 10 of the most wonderful people it has ever been my joy to work with, the 10 city councilmen. They were absolutely brilliant, totally honest, very frank, and we would iron out the policies of recovery as adult men and women. I told everybody, and I told a good friend tonight, he said, how did you do it? I said, by using my ears. When the council had a great idea, 11 of us ran with that idea. And we hammered out and got a policy. And the more the council gave good ideas, and we ironed out the nickels and dimes of each part of these policies, we then began to see order. I will say you one more thing about the morale of the city. On Sunday evening, about 4 o'clock, Charlie Swander, and you got to be older than me to remember Swander Bakery. Anybody remember? Best donuts in town, right? They were wonderful, and he supplied Safeway and everybody else and their brother. But Charlie served on the city council, and he was a dear friend, and he was one of my closest advisors. And we decided we would have an informal meeting of the council. And so we used a small room in the courthouse because City Hall didn't have water, sewer, telephone, electricity, or anything else, and the phones were out. And so we had this meeting, and all 10 councilmen got there, but I did not call the meeting to order because in South Dakota, you can't have a government meeting without the reporters in the room. That's just the simple law of South Dakota, and it's good law. But I knew that the reporters from the Journal and KOTA and others were coming. And so we sat there, and this federal official from FEMA, or what later became FEMA, he said, I just have to bring this up right now. We need authority from the city council and the mayor to go back in and repair 700 mobile home pads in the same mobile home parks that had been located right almost in Rapid Creek. The elevation differential on the afternoon of June 9th in about half the mobile homes was about 18 inches above creek level. Those mobile home parks should never have been located there in the first place. Ain't hindsight wonderful? So the long and short of that story, and please just give him one more moment here. He said that all we needed was a simple motion, and he would bring in the federal contractors and engineers and redesign the pads, and we'd put them right back they were at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, June 9th. And Leonard Swanson, graduate of South Dakota State, a registered professional engineer, was the city's public works director. We called him the city's visionary. He really had a noggin on his head, had a wonderful family, and he'd been with his sons all night long on the night of the flood, saving people down on Omaha Street between 8th and 5th. And he said, no, we cannot sentence the survivors to one more night on the suicidal floodplain. And the council, all 10 of them sat there. I hadn't had 30 seconds to think about that concept. I had other emergencies, the water plant, the sewer plant, all the other duties and the departments we were trying to bring online. And all of a sudden, it was silent in the room. And Dr. Larry Lytle, who was president of the city council, raised his hand. He said, I think Swanee's right. I move that we forbid FEMA from using federal funds to repair the mobile home parks by the creek. Al Wilson, a wonderful councilman, raised his hand and said, I second that. He was a mid-level manager at the phone company. We voted 10-0. And I told Kay, please insert into the minutes that the mayor supports the motion. We had a recovery plan within 48 hours after the start of the flood. A little bit of optimism was possible at that moment.
Now, doing all of that in the floodplain is a pretty dramatic change. Did you get much pushback over that?
Well, there was so much news and so much sorrow and so many missing people. On the Sunday night after that meeting, Tommy Hennies, a lot of us remember how much we loved him. He was a great, great policeman. He walked in and he said, Mayor, I have an announcement. He said, the missing list is now over 4,000. It had been computerized by the staff at the National College of Business, but we had more, I can't say that right. We had so much on the agenda that we didn't have time to worry about that exclusively. Says we were very, very challenged, and we got to sleep sometime. And so that's how we began to crawl out of the debris and with this constant sadness. I get a phone call, Chief Johnson said that Assistant Chief Kiefer and I have met with the 2 firemen's family where we found the bodies, but we can't find the body for the 3rd fireman. Just brings you to tears instantly. I commanded 240 men in Vietnam, and I brought every one of them home. And we didn't get that lucky during the flood. Okay.
Now, talking about those casualties, 238 people killed, more than 3,000 injured. How do you deal with that many at once? Because obviously, nothing is set up for that.
Well, you just take a deep breath every morning and go to work about 4, meet with the Civil Defense Board, tell them how the city was progressing. They tell me about how the body count was being managed. Little by little, we just attacked one issue at a time. But I had this worry. Your question's so good, Jack. I had this worry in the back of my mind, and I'd only shared it with Charlie Swander, because he had such seniority and such a bright, and he loved Rapid City, been selling them donuts since the Civil War. And Charlie was just a great guy. And he said, Don, he said, he said to me privately, what are we going to do if Mr. Wessel cannot get the water plant repaired within a week or so? The reservoirs will be drained dry because the National Guard was using 5,000-gallon trailers and tankers and thousands of 5-gallon cans of water at 15 water points in the city where people could come in to pick up free water that we knew was potable. But that was going down in supply. So Charlie and I sat there by my desk, and we figured, we just picked a number out of the blue sky. I said, what if we need 350,000 cases of bottled water a day? And Charlie said, I think that'd be a good start. Let's order those. Well, I said, you know, money doesn't grow on trees, and we weren't sure the feds would pay for that. But I called water bottling plants in Minneapolis and Denver, and I told them to get their reservoirs ready, their reserves, and get truckers ready, and we would see if the feds would cover the cost of 350,000 cases of water. You can imagine the Kmart parking lot with a mountain of water and people crowding in to load 5, 10 cases at a time. Well, we did not eventually make that order, but I had not even told the council about it because I was afraid there would be panic. But then Mr. Wessel rang the bell and got the water plant functioning on the Thursday morning after the flood, and we did not need to call in the bottled water.
Now, a minute ago, you were talking about the missing list, having so many people. What was that like for people at that point? Not knowing, are they alive? Are they on the other side of town?
Sir, the missing list was the big question mark. Everybody in the city knew somebody with a name on the missing list. And that uncertainty led to short-temperedness and despair. And how long before we give, hey, Barnett, are we ever going to have clean water again so I can stop boiling my water? I said, give us a few more days. We're ready to take more emergency actions. But little by little, we just attacked those issues. KOTA was a leader in this. They began to broadcast the names 24 hours a day, and the people were told, if you're looking for Uncle Charlie and now you found him, call this series of numbers here, and we'll take his name off the missing list. And by 10 days later, we had less than 1,000 names on the missing list. Well, Jack, that meant that 3,000 families were not terrified with despair. The Uncle Charlie had been found. And so we tried to be just as clear as we could. And I'll tell you one thing, the council and I insisted we would not lie to the people. We would not fib or bend the facts. They trusted us from the beginning, and I was very proud of that.
Now, you talked about the response. You had military response. You had federal response, state response. How about just regular people? How much is the community itself turning out to do whatever they can at that point?
I'd say just about everybody. We had to get the drugstores open and the grocery stores open. The supermarkets were bringing in convoys of trucks from Minneapolis and Denver. Little by little, we got the grocery stores open. The people who had purchased Charlie's Wanderers Bakery worked 36 hours a day, they told me, and made bread and all perishables. Tons of this had to be delivered to the water or to the landfill that had been ruinated by the flood itself. But little by little, we started plugging these holes and bringing some stability. And after a week, we had a plan. And then a great thing happened, Jack. We had to keep information coming to the citizens of Rapid City. And you know who stood up? The faculty at the School of Mines. On the Thursday after the flood, they had a front page article on the front page of the Rapid City Journal, and they talked about one of the engineers, a good friend of mine, wrote the paper. He said, we engineers feel that we would be held criminally negligent if we did not advise the mayor and the council to never rebuild on the shoreline of Rapid Creek for residential or commercial businesses. And all of a sudden, 6 more faculty from the School of Mines began to issue papers. And the big discussion was, what type of a flood had we just survived? We figured then after a couple of weeks, it was a 500-year flood. That meant that there we had a 1% chance that a flood like this might happen within a week or 10 days. But little by little, this idea grew. We had 26 public hearings in every precinct, every school, every junior high, and we told the people we were thinking about devising a plan where we would not rebuild in the lowest reaches, the lowest areas of the Rapid Creek floodplain, and the people began to think that's a pretty good idea. But look at the problems on their mind. Here's Harry Jones, wife and 3 kids, has a house and a mortgage at 6%, and it's $50,000. Well, you can do the debt service pay on that, but he doesn't have a house anymore. His house is totally gone. There might be a few bricks, a third of his driveway, 10% of his foundation. His house is, you don't know, it's in the landfill already. And so little by little, we needed a program that would provide some financial assurance and certainty for the disaster victims, because we didn't want them to be filled with despair. We were worried about massive suicides. It could have gotten worse and worse, and by August, Congress passed the 1972 Disaster Recovery Bill. And they provided, through the SBA, 30-year term, 1% mortgages on the combined mortgage for the disappeared house, the new house they had to move into, and you had a mortgage that was calculated at 1% over a 30-year amortization. I then went out and talked to the people. I walked the neighborhoods, and they would come out of their mobile home or wherever they were living, and they said, Mayor, that is a payment we can handle. We might not have to take bankruptcy. And then we got some optimism going. And then by that time, the Air Force had helped us, FEMA had helped us, and by July 20th, we had 1,000 families living in brand new mobile homes at locations 3 or 4 or 5 miles from Rapid Creek, and not on the shoreline of that killing, charming little creek that goes through our town. Just think about that. But there were heroes. Jack, I know I'm talking fast, but listen. On the morning after the flood, I ran into Mrs. Medley. I knew already that her husband had been killed. He was the commander of the Salvation Army, and she needed a building. I ran into her in the parking lot behind the courthouse. She said, Mayor, we got to feed the survivors. They don't have clothing. The only thing they have is on their back. They're lucky they're alive. They got a brother missing. And, you know, all this uncertainty. And then Wes Storm, the city recreation director, he said, why not make the old city auditorium at 6th and Quincy into a soup kitchen to be managed by the Salvation Army? Mrs. Medley just smiled. She said, that'll work, that'll work. They went up there, they got the churches to help clean the building, and by 2 o'clock the afternoon of the 10th, they began to feed the survivors. That means you got a warm meal in your tummy, folks. And guess what happened? 10 days later, I talked to Mrs. Medley, and she was grieving terribly because her husband had been killed in the flood. And she came up to me and she said, Mayor, during the first 8 days, we fed 26,000 meals. That's what the people of Rapid City were doing, Jeff.
A minute ago, you mentioned they had called this a 500-year flood event. Tell me about the warning you got from the Weather Bureau a few days after the initial flood, that more storms were coming and this could be happening again.
I was in my office about 6 o'clock on the following Saturday after the Friday night flood. You could call that the 8th day. And I was talking to the fire chief and the police chief. We were getting the dates set for the funerals and doing these terribly painful things. And the Weather Bureau called and said, Don, it was raining like mad outside. And the Weather Bureau called me and said, Don, the clouds all over the Black Hills are identical to a week ago. Oh, I said, come on. I can't be calling an emergency every time a cloud flies over the airport. Well, she didn't like that, I'll tell you. But anyway, within moments, she said, Don, I can't speak for you, but I'm giving you an order. The clouds are identical. So I took the car. Both of the chiefs called in their second and third shifts. They took the sirens on the fire trucks, all the police cars, and they went into the neighborhoods near the creek and ordered people to get away from the creek as rapidly as possible. I went up to KOTA. I made the announcement, and it was pretty good. I said, now listen, this is not a drill. We have the potential for a second flood. And I have the word of the senior people at the Weather Bureau that the clouds are identical right now as to what they were last Friday evening. And everybody in town by that time had their TV and their radio on, and I'm urging you to get away from every major drainage corridor in the city. Now, if I'd have shut up then, I wouldn't have embarrassed myself. And I took a look at my microphone, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, this is Don Barnett. I'm declaring martial law and ordering you people. There's Mike Madden on the city council. He just said, oh God, what did he do? But anyway, so I made the announcement, and then Rob Duvall went like this, cut me off, and then they ran that. And so I went out to Stevens High School. I think everybody in South Canyon and Canyon Lake was parked at Stevens High. I went down to West Junior High. You couldn't get on the streets. All the church parking lots were filled, and they were starting to pour cars onto the football field out there at West Junior High. And then I looked up, and there was a blue sky above Hangman's Hill. And I said, I think I got a butt kicking coming. So I went to the National Guard office, and I came in his headquarters up there. All the generals and colonels stood up. Oh, Mayor, that was a great call. Martial law, by God, I bet the people are really moving tonight. And General Corning came out of his office, and he went like this. And I said, I'm pretty sure going to get a butt kicking here. And so I walked in there, and he was so calm, and he shook my hand. He said, now sit down on the couch, Don. I'm not sure you can legally call martial law, but I can. And if you want me to, I'll declare Marshall County all over martial law all over the four county disaster area in the Black Hills. Well, then I heaved a sigh of relief, and I said, but I got a problem, General. I said, there's blue sky over Hangman's Hill. And he said, oh, shit.
Were you feistier then, or are you feistier now?
Oh, I'm mild now.
Okay.
But anyway, I ran right down to KOTA, called the martial law off. The blue sky returned. There was not a second disaster, but two teenagers had been joyriding Robbinsdale, and they went off the end of Meade Street and were killed in an automobile accident that night. Very sad.
As you move into the recovery stage, what was the biggest challenge that you had at that point?
Well, let's talk about some positive things while I try to tell you what the answer is. The city council and I were getting along. We were flattering the county commission. They were flattering us. There wasn't any terrible little picky political crap going on. It was all serious business. But would you rephrase that so I can try to really give you a short answer? Oh, I'm sorry. I will try.
When you got into a recovery, what was the biggest challenge, and how do you decide your priorities?
Well, the biggest challenge was housing. But we did get that solved by July 20th with temporary mobile homes. But then we weren't sure that HUD was going to give us we applied for $60 million to relocate about 2,000 families, and then we'd have this parkway all the way from Canyon Lake down to the sewer plant in Rapid Valley. And we were hoping that would come together, and it was coming together slowly, but believe me, after we got 1,000 families into mobile homes, the pressure kind of settled off. The Salvation Army kept using the auditorium. Thousands and thousands of people were fed every day, but all of a sudden the sense of immediacy and urgency was not quite as intense as it had been on June 15th. And then we took the program and the application to HUD in Denver. Swanee and I sat there and sweat blood for about 10 hours. They brought in experts from 15 regions of the United States. We explained the plan. One of these guys said that would be the most radical flood-related recovery in the history of America. And the other 14 said, yeah, but it's about the smartest plan, too. So we came back home. They sent the application, great big boxes and tonnage of paper, to HUD in Washington. And 14 days later, Vice President Agnew came to Rapid City Central High School in the auditorium and announced that President Nixon was providing $48 million to evacuate the floodplain in Rapid City. Then we just had to hold on, keep people sleeping safely. We had a disaster foundation by that time, and we had raised $1,500,000, and that money was being distributed to a very select computerized list of authentic disaster victims. The city council was watching every penny of it, as were the county commissioners, and little by little, we even asked the state auditor to send a couple of men out here, take a look at it, make sure we're not doing anything wrong with the donations. And every time we made a distribution of that money, it relieved a little bit of the pain. And then we had the money. And then we made the decision that that would be the policy. We would buy the land from Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Jones and Kilpatrick. We'd buy those, but we would immediately zone that land parks. And in South Dakota law, the legislature had passed a beautiful law that says you can't convert parks without a vote of the people. Mike Madden I read his lips. So when we put that land in the park system, it was there for virtually ever, unless you went through rezoning hearings and public, and as Larry Lytle would say, nobody wants fewer parks. And that cohesive idea stayed together until deep into the fall when we made our first relocations.
Now, when I talked to you a couple weeks ago, the Greenway seemed to be something that you feel really good about.
I do feel
what is
good
out
about
there right now.
I do feel good about, but I'm not quoting myself. The engineering faculty at the School of Mines gave us all of this technical, highly complicated engineering judgment that we simply should not go back and violate the floodplain again. We had a record of 7 floods on the Rapid Creek floodplain in the 20th century. 3 of those floods had killed people. Now, wouldn't it be stupid to go back after you killed 230 people and do it again? And we kept singing the same song. And little by little, the people were standing behind us, and we got busy with the urban renewal relocation program. And I can tell you the optimism then was returning, and people began to think, yes, there might be a future for Rapid City. But these hundreds and hundreds of families did not need to take personal bankruptcy. But you know who else didn't have to take bankruptcy? The banks and the savings and loan. The generosity of the federal taxpayers had bailed out the banks and bailed out the S&Ls. They didn't express their appreciation very much, but the city council, in their wisdom, prevented a financial disaster from falling upon Rapid City.
Do you ever remember a point the first time you kind of felt like we're starting to get back to normal?
When Mr. Agnew was here at the old Central High School auditorium, before Stan used his money to remodel it, I got to thinking, maybe this year will end okay. And then the council continued to show their optimism and their cohesion, and we didn't have the petty political crap, and we little by little climbed out of despair, and by January we were very optimistic that there would be a recovery.
Outside of the physical changes in town, how did the community change from before the flood to after the flood?
Well, I think that's a tough one. I ducked your other one because I just couldn't think of a short answer. No, the people began to have trust in their government. And the election in the fall of 1972 was not mean and brutal, where the Republicans and Democrats were yelling at each other and slanderous conduct and all that crap. We had a fair, calm election without a lot of hysterical yelling and screaming and character assassination. And then little by little, we got these mobile home parks. We started to close them within 6, 8 months because private enterprise went out and built commercial mobile home parks in safe locations with good zoning. Well, then they could build those things pretty fast. Little by little, we started closing the federal parks and moving those mobile homes to a new safe commercial park. And then we would make radical changes like that, and the people were madly in love with this 30-year term 1% loan program. And little by little, we had about 100 closings on the first 100 lots by the first quarter of 1973.
Now, 50 years later, what most sticks in your mind today from then?
The sadness. Ken Johnson was in his fire truck, and I was up at St. John's Hospital helping unload some injured people, and the fire truck was there, one fire truck, and I asked the lieutenant if I could use his radio, and it was raining like hell, just terrible. But I had my 7-subject notepad, spiral binder, and I picked up the radio and I said, "Mayor Barnett on the line here. Chief, do you hear me?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm at St. John's. We just left some patients." He said, "Mayor, this is the hardest call I've ever had to make. I think we lost 3 firemen." I sat there in the rain. He said, "We're not sure. We don't have any bodies identified, but we found the fire truck they were using because it had been parked right there on the Blessed Sacrament side of the old bridge." And then we had 3 missing firemen. And then Chief Messer told me we'd had a death of the man in the police reserve. And my heart just felt with sadness. And so you had that, best I can say is that plague of sadness on our spirit as that Sunday morning, or that Saturday morning came up. Ladies and gentlemen, a fog of death hung over Rapid City. You couldn't see from here to the back, not the back door. Couldn't see from here to the screen. There was heavy, heavy fog, and people had on their lights. And then the Gap in the Bacon Park Shopping Center, 4 feet of water. So I had Ken Johnson start up all the fire trucks and bring them into the Gap there on Mountain View, Jackson Boulevard, and the Bacon Park parking lot, and pump that water over the railroad back into Rapid Creek. The railroad was never underwater, at least in that area. So then we moved millions of gallons of water that was just laying stagnant all over the commercial heart of Rapid City. And then we were able to get that water out of sight and out of mind. And then we got the people to clear and check out the bridge at McDonald's. And when that bridge was proven to be viable again, we had 2-way traffic. People could get from the west to the east and back, and oh boy, the people, that was the morning when all of a sudden there was a little bit of hope, and little by little things got better.
All right. We do have a couple of microphones out there. If you have questions for Don, or comments, or stories that you would like to tell from the flood of 1972. Don, when you talk about the sadness, it still seems like that still hits you hard today.
It's very hard to say. Those firemen love their country. They love their city. They didn't run away from the water. They ran to the water to save people, and in the process, 3 of the 4 died. The one fireman, when the cabin he was on started to roll toward the spillway, and then they were all worried that the Canyon Lake would fail, he took off his boots, threw his axe in the water, took off his heavy coat, dove in, and somehow swam to the almost destroyed Canyon Lake Club and crawled out on the beach there. And the firemen found him 2 or 3 hours later, and he was almost comatose. He was so tired and so cold. And but the firemen saved their own, got him to a hospital, got him cleaned up. But a year later, I talked to him. He said, "Mayor, I don't want to be a fireman anymore." And I said, "I don't want to be the mayor next time who has to send his firemen and policemen into the creek area to save somebody because of bad zoning and bad land use planning." I wanted to make it easier for the city to save themselves again after the next flood. And those things were on my mind all summer.
Now, you've always kind of said this is not a Don Barnett thing, but this was a massive team effort.
It was a massive team effort, but according to the charter, Mayor of Rapid City can't do very much, can't do anything real awkward and radical without the support of a majority in the council. And during that first summer and early fall, we passed the policies by a vote of 10 to nothing. Do you know what that means? That you hammer it out and work hard and act like adults and use your ears, and then when they all vote 10 and the mayor agrees, we didn't have a pouting minority, where 2 council might say, "Well, that meeting last night was a bunch of crap. I disagree with everything the mayor's trying to do." We didn't have that happen. I think that the city council were 10 adults, brilliant, and we would have never had a recovery the way we had without those 10 people. I look out in the audience, I see Bernita Laux, a housewife from South Canyon, brilliant on the council, always wise, asking the penetrating questions. I see Mike Madden, PhD, and he was living in Rapid City and willingly served on the council. And man, we had some horsepower. I mean real horsepower. If we'd had a weak, faltering, bitter debating, yelling and screaming at the council table, the people would have had no reason to have confidence in us to lead them out of the quagmire of despair. Sir.
Thank you very much. It's been fascinating and amazing to hear everything that the mayor did and the council, and we thank you so much. Now, from here today, looking forward to the next 50 years, what's your advice to those of us that are here and want to take us into the next 50 years?
Don't violate the floodplain again, period. When people talk to the mayor, "Oh, we just want to put a 12-unit apartment house near the Dunn Coffee Shop." No, the Dunn Coffee Shop is out of the floodplain, but if you go north of there, it's all floodplain. And you can't let this micro rehabilitation of the floodplain ever happen again. If you do, you'll kill more people during the next disaster. My God, why can't we be fast learners? The mayor's right. They used to come to me. Remember when Nash Finch wanted to build a big strip shopping center where the soccer fields are at Mountain View in Omaha? Well, guess what? They took that to a vote, and guess what happened? 63% of the people voted no. And those dummies took on the soccer moms. And the soccer moms just beat the tar out of them. But I think that's pretty good government, isn't it? Aren't the people in a democracy supposed to hold the majority rule?
Don, I think, we've got somebody else coming up here.
Would you talk a little about going on national TV and asking tourists to come to Rapid City?
Well, that's quite a story, and it's not so gruesome as some of the painted agony that I've defined tonight. On the Tuesday after the flood, I was out at the gate to Canyon Lake Drive because those big cottonwoods, about half of them had been knocked down, and nobody had moved them. And we still had several hundred people on the missing list, and we had to find them. And so I was out there directing traffic, and the National Guard was in there with the bulldozers, and the FEMA contractors are cutting down some of the cottonwood trees. And this guy drove up in a blue car, and he waved at me, and I said, okay. So I waved at a National Guard guy, and he took my flags, and we went over in the shade, and I had a couple gallons of water in my car, and I gave the one guy 1 gallon. We both about drained the gallons. He said, sir, my name's John Palmer. I read the news on the Today Show. Ooh, boy, this guy's national, and he's very, very low key. He said, Mayor, my anchor wants to have you and me report on 5 o'clock Mountain Time and 7 o'clock Eastern Time and do about a half an hour or do 15 minutes on the Today Show. Well, we'd been aware that the number of tourists visiting South Dakota was in the dumper. Somebody called me and said, Don, there's 2 cars in the Reptile Gardens parking lot, and there's nothing in Mount Rushmore parking lot. We were going to have a secondary economic disaster. If we didn't have tourism, about a third of the economy of western South Dakota be in the dumper going into the fall, on top of the disaster. And so I said, I'll help you, I'll help you. So we met at 5. Yeah. And for the first time since the flood, I had a suit on. And he was a very fair man. And so we went over in the corner, and he said, Don, now, you know these answers. There's not a surprise question here. You give me short answers. And I said, yes, but if I do that, will you let me scream about tourism? He said, yes, but if you give a long answer, I'm going to cut you off. I said, okay. And so we got started, and the first was his anchor in New York asked 2 or 3 questions, and then we got on a roll. And he was such a gentleman, John Palmer. He died about 6 months ago. I tried to get him out here for the 40th anniversary of the flood, but all of a sudden, he would throw me about, well, how about Mount Rushmore? Is it underwater? And I said, absolutely not, folks. I can guarantee you that every highway to Mount Rushmore is open, period. And you're not going to have any problem if you take your vacation in the Black Hills. And so we finished the first 15 minutes, and then Monty Lose come running out of the studio, the engineering office, and said, they liked it, they're coming back for 17 minutes. So we got a whole half an hour to talk about tourism. And anybody can talk about the game lodge, in Scudder State Park, the buffalo. I grew up and listened to everything about the tourist business. And I gave good answers. Well, and so it was kind of funny. And Kay had come to work, and the phone at my office in the old city hall just absolutely exploded. I mean, you had people calling from South Dakota saying, Mayor, you've saved the tourism season. No, I have not saved the tourism. But anyway, the long and short, people wrote hundreds of letters, but we finally got some positive news about South Dakota, and toward the end of June, the tourists returned. And then Governor Knight had a fella in the highway department named Steve Burns, who was an advertising genius, and they built a bunch of television, several millions, and then they went to the 8 states that normally send most of their tourism to South Dakota, and they just did primetime saturation. South Dakota's open for business, and they were very Hollywood type ads, and little by little we came back. It wasn't a banner boom boom year for tourism, but it was a good year for tourism, and so the tourist industry did survive. But people always tease me about the John Palmer interview.
I would feel guilty if I didn't say, you want to plug your book?
Oh, would I like to plug my book?
I figured the answer to that one.
Well, you know, I'm a historian by training, and I kept notes, and I had a silly habit. In the fall, I'd go to Kmart or someplace and buy about 10 of those 7-subject spiral binders that kids use, and I'd normally be working on one of those, and I'd have my phone numbers in there and notes, and every once in a while I'd give it to Kay, and she said, I'll clean it up, and her penmanship was, you could read hers. And she would list the phone numbers, and a little star here, I called this guy, you know, and I had those 7-subject binders in a cardboard box in my garage, and I'd had them for a long time. So about 5 years ago, I went through that, and then the journal got their morgue healthy again with everything being brought up to date, and I went to the journal and purchased 1,000 copies of the newspaper articles for the summer of 1972. And then I wrote the book. And I've got to brag a little bit here. My publisher who's here tonight, he said, Don, I need 5 endorsements for the book. Well, I knew a bunch of the reporters who gave a fine program this afternoon, and I gave him 19 endorsements for the book. And it's been selling very well. And I'm the guy in the dark suit back here at the table, and we take checks.
All right. All right. Well, Don, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
A lot of my friends in Rapid City miss Joanne. And she was wonderful. 38 years of marriage. But she got a bacterial infection 12 years ago, settled on her aorta, and she died 18 days later. And she was Rapid City's first lady. And I miss her. But 7 years ago, I met one of the most wonderful ladies I've ever known in my life. And she's sitting here, and I love her dearly. And Shirley, would you stand up and just wave, please? Please stand up, honey. And Jack, I thank you. Your questions are fair, right on the nose, and I've tried not to be too diplomatic.
Yeah.
Good evening, Jack and Don. You mentioned the journal a couple of times. And Don, over the year, I want to express my appreciation. You have always given credit where credit is due. You have a fabulous book, and in reading through it, you've acknowledged the people beyond yourself, and I appreciate that very much. But I'll still always remember you were 29 years old on June 9th. And I was looking back through some of the papers. Many of us collected the newspapers. My wife was here during the flood. Her father collected many of the newspapers. In addition to the Rapid City Journal back in June of '72, we also had the Rapid City Guide. And a letter to the editor in the Rapid City Guide caught my attention. The headline of the June 22nd, 1972 Rapid City Guide was Community Recovers with New Appreciation for Life. On page 6, letter to the editor. Dear City Dad, and I like this beginning sentence. This will be a short note as I have dishes to do. Although Father's Day has passed, I'm taking this opportunity to wish you a belated but sincere Father's Day. Because I am several 1 or 2 years older than you, the father image did not manifest itself until I overheard a chance remark referring to you as a city dad. The more I thought of it, the more fitting that title seems to me. During the past 2 weeks, you have kept us together with your courage, your leadership. As a true father does, you calmed our fears, gave us direction, and most importantly, supplied us with an anchor of reason and stability in a sea of chaos and confusion. Just wanted you to know how much I appreciate it. Affectionately yours, Anne St. George. P.S. It appears we all have even more trying times ahead. It's reassuring to know we can count on you. Thanks again, Dad. God bless you, Don Barnett.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Don, thank you. Thank you for all you did, all you're doing. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Let's hear it for Jack Caudill and Mayor Don Barnett. Thank you, gentlemen.